You spoke before about the Hebrew letters and how everything has significance. What made you choose the name Ilana?
So I was looking for Jewish names for my daughter, for my future daughter. And then I saw Ilana, and that was still when I was still in Spain. So in the very beginning, and I really liked Ilana because it's very similar to my German name, Juliana.
Oh, yeah.
And so I thought that taking a Jewish name makes me feel a little bit more Jewish already. And also living in Israel, it's just nicer to have a Jewish Israeli name than having a foreign name. So I started calling myself Ilana. Obviously, my old friends or my family still calls me Juliana. I also want my husband to call me Juliana because I feel that this is my real name. But everyone else calls me Ilana.
All Hebrew names have a meaning. What does Ilana mean?
Ilana is actually not Hebrew, it's Aramaic, but it is the word for tree, the female version of tree.
Okay, and do you relate to that in any way?
Yeah, I can relate to the tree because a tree is growing and also up and also down the roots. So what Judaism gave me is stabilization, because before I started to be interested in Judaism, my life was totally confused, I would say. Like, I lived in Mallorca, which is a party island, and I was partying a lot. And so you can imagine I was totally, I lost track of my life and I lost direction. So the tree is stable, is rooted, and the tree also grows spiritually.
Keeps you grounded, but you're always growing. And that's amazing. I love the analogy you gave us on that. So speaking of a tree, this is a great way to segue into something I wanted to ask you about. I read something that I really love that you wrote in one of your blogs. It was about the holiday of Sukkot. And the reason why I thought about it is a tree branch, the lulav branches. You wrote something about the symbolism of the lulav and the etrog. And I want to know if you can share that with everyone.
Yeah, sure. So the lulav and the etrog is one of my favorite Jewish items because the meaning behind it really touched me, and I really love it. Because in the Torah, we don't really understand why we use those items on Sukkot. So my favorite meaning is that all those four species represent one different kind of Jew. So the first kind of Jew is the Jew who studies a lot of Torah and has a lot of Torah knowledge. The second type of Jew is the one who studies Torah and also applies the Torah. The third one is the one who only applies the Torah without knowing much about the Torah or what it says in the Torah. And the fourth one is the one who doesn't know much about the Torah and doesn't apply it. And the meaning behind everything is that the Jewish people consist of all those four types of Jews, and in order to be the Jewish nation, we need all those four types of Jews to be the nation. And Am Israel is only complete with all those four, so we shouldn't judge that maybe the one celebrating in Tel Aviv is not a good Jew, because we need him to form the Jewish nation just as much as we need the one who studies a lot of Torah and is a tzaddik.
So I want to ask you something that we discussed in the beginning of this interview. You mentioned that you learned when you were younger in school that the Jewish people were the chosen people. Now, what have you now learned that actually means?
So when I came to Israel and I was in the plane, I thought that I'm protected because the chosen people, God's chosen people, are with me in the plane, so nothing can happen to the plane. Now I understand it as following. God asked all the nations if they want to keep his Torah law and if they want to receive the Torah. And only the Jewish nation accepted the Torah. And by that, not God chose the Jewish people, but the Jewish people chose Torah and chose God.
Yeah, and we want to be like a light unto the nations, to do good, to always do mitzvot. And even like when you hear, you see with Israel, every time there's a natural disaster somewhere in the world, Israel's already picking up, setting up a field hospital, offering their assistance even to the countries that are against Israel. After they experience any sort of natural disaster, Israel still always offers aid. And wow, so I really have to say I'm learning so much from you, and I'm really enjoying this. So I want to ask you now, since you've learned so much about Judaism and the Israeli lifestyle, I mean, you've got both of them together, what is something that you now know that you feel you can never be without?
I really appreciate having Shabbat in my life, because in today's life, everyone is always busy. There's always something to do, and Shabbat allows me to just forget about my to-do list and allow myself to do nothing. And this is a blessing.
Yeah. And is there some favorite part of Shabbat that you have? Like,
The food, maybe?
me too.